Hello, and welcome to another edition of Community Conversations for LMC Media. I'm Michael Witch, and with me on the screen today is Nicole Alifante. Welcome, Nicole.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today.
Well, I know that you're a Larchmont resident, and I know that, well, you've got many hats. You're a singer, you're a songwriter, you're a teacher, you're a producer, you're the founder of CURE, which is a really important organization, and maybe we could talk a little bit about that. But let's start with your music. Mayflower Avenue is a play, and now it's going to be in a dramatic podcast, I understand?
Well, it's had an interesting journey. It is a play with songs, we like to call it, because it's not a traditional musical. It's actually very much, I wrote it with this woman, Stephanie Stowe, who's a playwright. And it's very much a kitchen sink American drama. And yet conceptually, there's a rock band and there are singers who are sort of the doppelgangers for each actor in the piece. So let's say there's 11 characters. There's also 11 singers, and it's just kind of that bubbling that we all feel now when elections come, because they've been so funky in the last couple of years. And it's about, who are we as Americans, who are we as neighbors, what are we struggling with internally, and it's kind of.
So it was designed to be performed in front of a live audience.
It absolutely was, and
COVID got in the way.
Yes, in November of 2019. No. Yes, 2020. We had a beautiful reading. We used these incredible students from Lehman College, where Stephanie works. And it was just a wonderful turnout. We packed the house, and then we were ready to find theaters to help us workshop it, or producers. And then the pandemic hit, and we tried to raise a kind of a large sum of money to make it an audio kind of drama, but it just people were home worried, so they were making huge donations to people. But anyway, it's still there. It's still ready to potentially have a life.
Can you give us any hint on, is it it's actually going to come to a stage again?
We would love it to. There's no like big secret plan or anything. I think what we'll do is, this year we'll try to get it into theaters for a workshop or some small production for 2022. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So CURE, I mentioned it at the beginning of the interview, is the Coalition for Understanding Racism Through Education.
Yes.
How did you come to that? Through music?
No. That was, I'm sure you're familiar with Indivisible, Westchester.
Yes.
It was started right here in Larchmont, and I was working with an incredible group of women when that was bubbling up. And, I was sort of like watching all this political stuff happen before my eyes. And for me, what stood out the most was the racism that was coming to the surface. And I think personally, my whole life, I struggled with just color, like white, black, and how the messages I was sent as a child and things I was confused about. Even though I grew up in New Rochelle, which is very diverse, and I had a diverse group of friends. But so the election came and went, and there was a Black woman from New Rochelle who I had known, and I said, what I'm hearing just in general is bothering me. What should I do as a white woman? And she said, well, you can take a workshop. There's this great workshop through the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, which started in New Orleans right after the civil rights movement in the 70s. And they coined the phrase undoing racism. They essentially have these 3-day workshops where they explain the difference between interpersonal racism and institutional racism. And that I took it, and it really completely changed my life, because all of my confusions were clear. I didn't have the answers to anything, but my confusion about why I feel weird, why I have these biases, why things don't look right over there, it kind of historically was mapped out for me, and it just made perfect sense. So really, I was one of the founders. Meg Koifer, who's a dear friend and a very well-respected community member, helped me really legitimize it. She, introduced me to people in our area. And now we're a group of about, I would say, 8 women who put events together to discuss systemic racism, continuously.
And you call yourself leaders.
Yeah. I know. I know. We'd like to be, leaders in our community around this. And, we're predominantly white women in a predominantly white neighborhood. What I learned after I took the workshop, I ended up joining Nourishell Against Racism. And so I spent Monday nights for 4 years, connecting and listening to the stories of people from all different socioeconomic and ethnic racial backgrounds. And I was just really moved. And what I heard a lot was, we're tired, we can't explain this. Can you explain it to white people? Because you're a white person, that maybe should be your job. And again, explaining it or teaching it is not what we do. We learn along with the community. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to publicly learn with these brilliant, resourced, compassionate white folks in my community, and just have events and workshops and talks until we come to something that we didn't learn in our education. Many of us did not. I've grabbed some of the most profoundly educated people and said, you know what redlining is? And they'll be like, no, what is it? And then you have this quick conversation about redlining and you realize we just don't know the history. So
we better explain it right now for those people who are listening and don't know what redlining is.
Well, it was a federal practice, especially after World War II, where we built suburbs in America because there was a housing dearth. And so Levittown and places around the country sprung up, and the government dumped millions of dollars to build these really affordable homes with low interest mortgages, and they just were not offered to Black folks. And so even if you came home from having been on the GI Bill and you were a Black man and you fought for your country in France or wherever you were, you came back and you were not allowed that same picket fence. And so if that house was $10,000 and years later it was $350,000, and that might have put a kid through college, that wasn't afforded to a lot of Black folks in this country. So, there are these residual things that we say, oh, it's over, slavery's over, and it's all over, but it's not, because, even when you're looking at your own health history, you have to say, like, what have I done to my body? What genes did my mother have? And how does it affect me today? And it's the same thing with racism.
So who's in the coalition? Beside the leaders, there are groups or organizations. I know that LMC Media has been a partner in some of the projects. Who else is in the coalition?
We've had so much support. We have LAC, the Larchmont Avenue Church, when we first crept up, we needed space, and they, sat down, had a conversation with us, and they offered us space. So that was amazing. LMC Media, we work with the Community Resource Center a lot. We are connecting to more and more houses of worship. We have, I wouldn't say they're in the coalition, but I would say that they support our work. I know St. John, St. Thomas. I'm trying to think. We've dabbled a little bit in the schools, but I think the schools have to, they just have to make sure they know who they're working with when they go outside. And so I think we're building our reputation here and building that trust in the system. But yeah, we've had, after the murder of George Floyd, it was quite daunting, because we had a lot of people, especially white people and organizations, come to us and say, how do I have these conversations with our kids? How do I have these conversations with the people I work with? And so, we did our best to give resources. And that's really what we do. We don't teach it, like I said.
So one other term that comes up in the news a lot is systemic racism. Mm-hmm. What is that?
To my understanding, it's that, we build systems. We're one of the greatest countries in the world. And I think one of the misconceptions is that when you dig deeply into systemic racism, you're all of a sudden not patriotic, or you hate America, and I feel the opposite. I feel like this country's so incredible that we're like a middle schooler, and we want to get that kid in the right direction so that it goes far. And so I feel like we built systems in our country, housing systems, education systems, law systems, and they were really built for white people. And I think, people will roll their eyes, but what's interesting is that, and what I love about this work is that you don't have to take my word for it, because it's in history. It's literally written in our Supreme Court laws, in the words of the founding fathers, in the words of politicians throughout our history. There was just this white is supreme, and we're the dominant culture, and we're going to build these things so they work for us. And like Isabel Wilkerson in her book Caste has beautifully taught us that there is definitely a caste system here. And so it's one thing to say I'm kind to everyone, or I have Black people in my family, or my son has a best friend who's Black, and that's all interpersonal, and that's all wonderful, and that makes the world go around. But it's another thing when a system privileges one person over another simply because of the color of their skin. And then there's other, there are deeper reasons that happened. I think there was an elite group of white folks who were planters and slaveholders, and they wanted to make sure that everyone below them didn't get rowdy and didn't want too much of the pie. And so there's been like this narrative that, it was Lyndon Johnson who said, I think he said, if you tell the lowest white man that he's better than a Black man, you can pick his pockets, or he'll even hand you his wallet. And so that, it's dark, and I apologize to the audience who's like, oh, shut up. But these things were said, and they were said by our leaders for a reason. And there's a bootstrap story that we
We're going to have to leave it there because we run out of time.
I'm sorry. This is what happens when you ask me questions.
We'll come back and talk some more.
Yes.
Cure and music. And for those people who want to know more about Cure, where do they go? What's the website?
It is www.learnwithcure.com. And thank you for letting me ramble.
Well, you've been a wonderful guest, and thank you for spending the time with us today.